There is a very small country in the Middle East called Qatar, which has about the same number of people as Brooklyn, which is not even a city, it's a borough. And yet Qatar is leading the headlines today. And this is Hani Sabra to tell us why that's happening and whether it's a big deal or not. I'm Willis Sparks, Global Macro Director here at Eurasia Group. This is Hani Sabra, who is the practice head of our Middle East practice group. You look very nice today.
Thank you very much, Willis.
So my very first questions are entirely straightforward.
Okay.
What happened? Who did what to whom? And why is this such a big deal?
Okay, so let's go through this one by one. So what happened is this morning, Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Bahrain, and Egypt cut all diplomatic ties with Qatar. Mm-hmm. They also imposed basically a air, sea, and land ban on Qatar, right? And why is this happening now? So there's been a great deal of tension between Qatar on one side mm-hmm. and Saudi Arabia and the UAE and Egypt on the other side for a long time, right? There's been ebbs and flows in that tension. But why now is that the Saudis and the Emiratis basically saw an opportunity with a friendlier White House to put the squeeze on Qatar.
And why do they want to put the squeeze on little Qatar?
Exactly, so great question. So Qatar has pursued an independent foreign policy mm-hmm. for the last couple of decades, but they also did it very loudly, right? So Al Jazeera, when it was established in 1996, took very critical positions on issues that were very important.
And by the way, this is an important part of the story because
Sure.
Al Jazeera is a state-owned, state-dominated, state-directed media arm of the Qatari government. A lot of
Yes.
people don't realize that.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
So the journalists that work at Al Jazeera, some of them are professional journalists, but the overall ideological position mm-hmm. of Al Jazeera is supportive of the issues that the Qatari government supports, right? Mm-hmm. And so the Qatari government, as I said, began adopting an independent foreign policy in the mid-90s with the establishment of Al Jazeera. And they supported groups like the Muslim Brotherhood that were anathema to the Emiratis and to the Saudis and, of course, to Hosni Mubarak's Egypt, still anathema to Abdel Fattah al-Sisi's Egypt, to the Emiratis and to the Saudis, right? So that's a big piece of it. The second element is that Qatar has taken a more nuanced position on Iran, right? And this is how Trump fits into it. Because when there was tension between the Emiratis and the Saudis, mm-hmm. And the Qataris on the other side, right? With a guy like Obama in office, and Obama, working on the nuclear deal, the Gulf countries basically felt that they had to hedge in their relationships with Iran, right? Because they weren't sure which way the U.S. was going. Mm-hmm. Now that you have a president that is pro-Saudi, very clearly pro-Saudi, right? It's almost impossible to hedge. So the fact that Qatar has adopted this nuanced position on Iran, allowed the Saudis to retaliate now. They feel that they have the wind at their
back. So basically what we're saying is you've got the Gulf Cooperation Council, which is, a group of 6 different countries.
Yep.
And Qatar is a small member of this group.
They're all pretty small,
really led by the Saudis.
Saudi Arabia and the UAE. Yeah.
But they've been allowed to do their own thing, and they use, Al Jazeera was doing stories during the Arab Spring that a lot of these governments didn't like, and
Sure.
they're a little bit closer to Iran, et cetera, et cetera. And so the Saudis and the UAE, with help from Egypt, have decided basically to choose this moment to send the strongest possible message short of a war.
Yes.
Because they didn't just send the ambassadors home. They sealed the borders, and they're kicking all the Qatari nationals out of their countries, right? They got to leave in a few days.
Yeah, this is massive. This is unprecedented, right? So as I said, there's been tension between Qatar on one side and the Saudis and the Emiratis on the other before, right?
Right.
In 2014 it happened. They withdrew their ambassadors, right? Those countries pressured Qatar and they met halfway, basically, right? The dynamics in 2017 are very different. King Abdullah is gone from Saudi Arabia. King Salman is now the king. He takes a much harsher line on these issues than King Abdullah did, right? Donald Trump is president in the U.S., not Barack Obama, right? The issue in 2014 was primarily about the support for the Muslim Brotherhood. The issue in 2017 is partly about the Brotherhood, but partly about Iran.
Right.
So
now that Iran's out from under sanctions from the nuclear deal. And,
exactly.
Yeah. Okay.
The dynamics are very different, and you're right, this is unprecedented. This is not one of those things that generates a lot of headlines and should result in people saying, "Oh, move along. There's nothing to see here." No, there is a lot to see here.
This is a big deal. And again, part of this is the fact that Barack Obama, wisely or unwisely, decided to try and strike a balance between Saudi Arabia and Iran, between Sunni and Shia in the region, for the sake of stability. Trump's not doing that. Trump's all in with the Saudis.
Yes.
And what you're saying, if I'm understanding you correctly, is that based on that signal that the Saudis just got from Trump while he was in the region, now is the time for them to go hard against anybody who's offering quote-unquote aid and comfort to the Iranian enemy, including members of the Gulf Cooperation Council itself.
Yes, that's correct. But again, the big distinction also here is that it's Qatar specifically, in that other Gulf countries at times have pursued more nuanced positions.
Kuwait, for example.
Oman, right? They're clear examples. But they do it quietly. The difference is that Qatar does it very loudly and it's in your face, and that's really bothered Saudi Arabia.
Okay, so now one thing that I've read that you said today was that what the Saudis and the UAE and Egypt and Bahrain really want is they want to force either Qatar to shut up and start towing the line of the rest of the group, or they want to force a coup inside Qatar in which literally you have a new leadership that may be more amenable to the majority position. Am I stating that right?
The primary objective of Saudi Arabia vis-a-vis Qatar is to get Qatar to reverse its foreign policy position.
To get in line.
To get in line with Saudi Arabia. That's their primary objective.
Right.
How they get there is secondary.
Okay. And they're willing to, if it ends up being a coup, they're happy to go that way. It's not their first choice necessarily, but they're willing to see a change of literally a change of the government in Qatar if that's what it takes to get the Qataris in line.
Sure.
Okay. Now the next question is, I read a lot of what you write and hear a lot of what you say about the situation in Saudi Arabia. And one of the issues there, of course, is that you have the Deputy Crown Prince, Mohammed bin Salman, who's a very impressive, talented, ambitious person who may very well be the next king, depending on how things play out.
It's possible.
There's also a younger generation of leadership in the UAE, if I'm correct. How much of this harder line on Qatar toward Iran generally, the war in Yemen, all these, how much of this is being driven by the younger generation, or is that, do you think, overstated?
I think for Saudi Arabia it is. For the UAE it isn't.
Okay.
For the UAE it's veterans that are adopting strategic positions. In Saudi Arabia, what you have is a group of young leaders and a young leader in Mohammed bin Salman that's advancing, a more aggressive narrative on certain issues, economic issues, foreign policy issues. So it's not a new set of leaders in the UAE at all. It is a new set of leaders in Saudi Arabia.
Okay.
Not all new leaders in Saudi Arabia. Also, I wouldn't say that. The older generation in Saudi Arabia are the folks who had been frustrated by Qatar for decades. So it's not just a new leadership thing as well.
Well, obviously there's a lot of attention to Mohammed bin Salman because if he's very young, he's 31 years old.
Yep.
He is the defense minister, which puts him in charge of the war in Yemen and the approach to Syria and a lot of other things. And very importantly, he is in charge of the Vision 2030 economic diversification modernization process in Saudi Arabia. So when you woke up this morning and you saw what had happened with Qatar and what a big deal this is, did that tell you anything about this Mohammed bin Salman story, about whether he is effectively consolidating power? Is he more likely advancing toward becoming king in the near term maybe than he was?
Not this in particular. I think what it did tell me is that, the kind of incremental pressures that would have been the norm under previous Saudi leaderships is not the case today, right? So if this had happened a few years ago, the squeeze on Qatar would have been incremental, and it would have the Saudi leadership would have said, let's give the Qataris time to respond, and let's find a midway point we can meet at, right? Now it's rather than incremental, it's pressure suddenly, and the message is, we're not going to meet you halfway and you don't meet us halfway. You come 90% of our way, 95% of our way.
Sounds like the Donald Trump negotiating strategy in a way.
To some degree, yes.
So obviously the king made the decision.
Sure.
But who in the room, when they were discussing the possibility of doing this, do you think that Mohammed bin Salman was pushing for this, or do you think the king didn't need to be pushed? He's different from his predecessor. The king himself was ready to do this. Pure speculation, but
I don't know who's sitting in the room, but I would imagine that there wasn't a massive amount of difference in the Saudi sort of foreign policy establishment when it came to this particular question. The fact that you saw such coordinated action from the Bahrainis and the Emiratis and the Saudis means that this is something that's probably
and
been,
Egypt,
and Egypt, right? Probably been discussed for a while, behind the scenes. So, I would imagine that this wasn't something that they made a snap decision on right after Trump's visit. I'm sure that this is something that they'd been discussing for quite a while.
Okay, so you've highlighted the difference between this episode and one that we saw 3 years ago when there was a lot of pressure on the Qataris that didn't go nearly this far.
Yeah.
So do you expect that we're going to see a much harder line, much more aggressive approach to some of the issues that we see in the Middle East from the Saudis in particular? And if so, for readers on Facebook, for listeners, what should they be looking for to see where is the next shoe going to drop in this evolving Saudi approach to dealing with Iran in the region?
Well, this is the first and the most critical one because it involves sort of the Gulf. Right?
Yeah.
And the important thing I would point out is that, unlike past events, I think the harm to the idea of Gulf unity now is irreparable. So it's a big difference. I think that Saudi Arabia will be selective about where they push, right? They can't necessarily get the outcomes that they want in Syria.
Do you think in Oman and in Kuwait they're watching this thinking we have to adjust the way we approach this too? Or are they, as you said before, the difference is that they go quiet when the Qataris go loud. So maybe this doesn't really affect them at all.
Yeah, I wouldn't say that they're concerned in the same manner at all. As I said, they're generally fairly quiet about how they approach foreign policy differences.
Yeah.
So it's a radically different situation.
Okay, but this is going to get bigger before it gets smaller, is what we're saying. Okay.
For sure.
Thank you very much. I'm Willis Sparks, Facebook. This is Hani, Sabra. Well done. You do look very nice today. I wasn't just saying that.
Thanks a lot, Willis.
Thanks very much. Have a great rest of your Monday.